אחר צהריים טובים לכולם, כבר כמעט ערב. My name is Dafna-Dolberg, and I'm glad and honored to be the mediator of our next session. I want to start by introducing our distinguished lecturer, Dr. Pogel. Dr. Pogel has been working as a clinical psychologist in services for children with a range of psychological needs for over 25 years. For 20 years, he was the clinical director of the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services in Islington, London, where a community-based model of service delivery was developed. Additionally, he has been the clinical director at the Anna Freud National Center for Children and Families for the last 6 years and is a consultant to the AMBIT program. His main clinical interests are in developing effective community-based forms of therapeutic help for children and young people, and in developing national programs for training well-being practitioners for children and young people. In his lecture today, Dr. Pogel will continue introducing AMBIT to us and talk particularly about how mentalizing helps establish epistemic trust and as such contributes to teamwork. Peter, I will now turn briefly to Hebrew to explain about the session and the way it will work.
Okay.
הרצאתו של דוקטור פוגל תעסוק בנושא של מנטליזציה, המוכר לנו וכבר הוצג לנו, אבל הפעם בהקשר של העבודת צוות, והנושא של אמון הכרתי, Epistemic Trust, וכיצד ביחד הם תורמים לעבודת הצוות. ההרצאה תינתן באנגלית, תוך כדי ההרצאה לא תוכלו לשאול שאלות באופן ישיר, אבל בהחלט תוכלו לשלוח את שאלותיכם אליי דרך הצ'אט. אני אעקוב אחרי השאלות וארכז אותן עבורו, אפשר לכתוב את השאלות בעברית או באנגלית, מה שיותר נוח לכם. בתום ההרצאה ובהתאם לזמן שיוותר, אני אציג בפני דוקטור פוגל את השאלות שעלו. סביר להניח, ואני מקווה, שחלק מהשאלות יענו תוך כדי ההרצאה, ולא יחזור אליהן כמובן. כמובן, אנסה גם לקבץ יחד שאלות קשורות. זהו, אז יוצאים לדרך. Peter, the screen is yours.
Thank you on behalf of both of us. I suppose I couldn't help thinking for a moment, Namar, about when we first met and when you came to the Anna Freud Center and you introduced yourself and you said to me, I've read your book. And this was not quite an unusual event. I have actually had many people come to me and say they've actually read the book. I've had quite a few people say they've bought it, but I've not had so many people say they've read it. But not only had you read it, but as soon as we started talking, I realized that you really had read it. And you understood all sorts of things in the book that I'm not sure we were aware of when we wrote it. And particularly bringing a kind of organizational knowledge and expertise to our thinking. And it was a great pleasure, just in the very first meeting, to hear your thinking about AMBIT. So this is a lovely conclusion from that first meeting, which was a real pleasure to me.
Thank you, Peter.
I also just want to slightly apologize about the fact that nobody in England has had a haircut for about 6 months. We don't have hairdressers anymore. They've all gone. And this is perhaps the most noticeable thing about England is that everybody now goes around with a lot more hair than they used to. But let me come to the talk. I'm also was reflecting a little bit that how different it is to do a talk from your own kitchen, or this isn't quite my kitchen, but it's near my kitchen. How different it is and how different it feels. Wonderful to join you guys and wonderful to be able to do it in this incredible way. As you said very poignantly at the beginning, that it makes a certain sort of connections, but it loses other sorts of connections. And I must say, the kind of the way that I kind of was thinking about this before I started to talk about just sort of noticing one's own state of mind, a certain sort of nervousness about what it's like in doing these talks when you're doing it from your own house, rather than from the sense of connection that you have in the room with people, which is so, in many ways, so reassuring and important. Anyway, let me now move on to, I've just got to move a little bit, okay. The title, and I'm very much wanting to follow Namar's suggestion here. The focus here is going to be, for this talk, is going to be about applying AMBIT to teams. Applying AMBIT to teams in their work with young people or clients who have multiple needs and multiple workers. So what I want to try and focus in for the next hour is, what does that look like from the point of view of a team? And the title of my talk is Creating Helping Systems. And each of those words has an importance. Helping systems don't happen of their own. You can't just design them and they just run. They have to be created through acts of imagination. The system will not work in a mechanistic way, in my view. That creating helping systems requires, as in the way that Dickon has been talking about, an imaginative effort to see the world from multiple perspectives and to include one's own perspective in that seeing. I call it helping because we like to move away from a more, if I can say, more narrowly defined idea of therapy to the fact that helping is a universal aspect of human life. You can go to pretty well any film, any story, there will be any novel, there will be incidents of help. Help takes place as part of daily life in the same way as conversation and breathing and all sorts of other universals. Help, so we like to stay with helping. And it is a system because for children, and I think for adults too, but particularly for children, there is never only one person involved. The idea of a helping system is that there will always be, pretty well always, there's parents, carers, teachers will all have an impact in a child's life that will be related in some way to the nature of their difficulties. There's no, the sort of nature of difficulties, if a child is self-harming, feels suicidal, is deeply sad, is traumatized. These things don't, as everyone knows, don't take place in some segregated part of a person's life. They are in their life, and these things will have impact in their different settings. So it is a helping system. How do we enable not just professionals, but professionals, families, grandparents, all sorts of people who may have a part to play in providing effective help for children with multiple needs. And the starting point for us is a team. And so I'm going to go slightly, this might seem an odd kind of now connection, to go from AMBIT to jazz. But for some of you, I'm sure there's many of you, or some of you in the audience who will be very familiar with Miles Davis as one of the great jazz musicians of all time. And and I suppose I like to think of a team a bit like a jazz band. They're not all playing the same instrument. They're not all playing the same notes, but they are trying to play together in such a way that they create a tune. They create a tune. And what was this quote from Miles Davis, which I think is so interesting for me, is this thing where he says, when I listen to my own music, I'm often listening for the notes that I can leave out. And the wonderful thing about, I think this is that part of what we need to be thinking about when we're working in complex teams with people with complex difficulties is that the capacity to complicate, the capacity to make the helping system incomprehensible, not only to the clients, but sometimes to ourselves, is so high that the effort towards a simplicity, a capacity to hear all the notes, rather than a kind of some jazz very wonderful, but rather overcomplicated for me. The kind of the idea that we try and hear the different sounds clearly. So for me, Miles Davis is a bit of an inspiration, and I like to think of a team a bit like a really well-functioning jazz band. Okay, now as Dickon explained, the AMBIT model it consists of these four components. I'm going to focus on working as a team, but you'll see that it incorporates various ideas that come with working with your client or working with networks and learning together. But I think hopefully I got the right kind of steer from Namar. That very much was what the interest here was. How do you apply this to work between colleagues? Much of what you guys are doing in your work with clients, I think will remain somewhat unchanged by AMBIT. It's how the different instruments start to play together, which I think you've expressed an interest in. So let me flip through that. There's a kind of, sorry. Okay. So I have in mind, I'm going to try and, if I can in the time, come up with sort of 9 kind of themes or strands or ideas about working as a team. And the first one I'm going to be talking about is focusing on the idea of help seeking and help receiving. We very much like the work of Edgar Schein, who wrote a book, very lovely, simple, not simple, but has the sort of Miles Davis quality of just of being able to hear the notes clearly, of a book called Help, or Helping, I can't remember now, where he particularly emphasized the vulnerabilities of people in a help-seeking position. And I think really articulated that really well. And I think it explains why mentalizing is so fragile during processes of help giving and help receiving, and the necessity of moving from implicit mentalizing, which we all do all the time perfectly and works perfectly well much of the time, to explicit mentalizing. The need to kind of be really kind of careful and clear about what's okay and not okay, because the potential for creating shame, embarrassment, fear, anxiety at the point of asking for help or receiving help is so high. So I suppose one of the things that will be a feature of about a mentalizing approach to this situation is a kind of style which involves lots of what we call permission statements. Is it okay for me to ask about this? That kind of that you're trying to create a context in which you're recognizing the state of mind of the person in such a way that you're not taking any assumptions about how they may feel about this delicate process of moving into help giving, help receiving a relationship. But I suppose one of the things another kind of example of a permission statement is, can you tell me when I ask you a question you don't want to answer? I suppose this is one I kind of became one of my common kind of in my sort of menu of when I asked, because what I liked about this was the assumption it conveys that I am going to ask something that I don't want to answer. That it's not like it just if it happens, but it's more like when it happens. But because it kind of conveys, not because I want to, because I don't want to do that, but because there's likely that in these early stages, there will be moments of insensitivity that I don't know what it is that's okay and what's not okay. And so when I ask a young person about their relationship with their dad and they close down on me and they go silent on me, it's not because I would have intended that, but because I don't know about, at this point, the sensitivities that they might have about that relationship in their life. The point here is that when I'm now talking about help seeking and help receiving, the kind of the usual kind of assumption would be that we're particularly thinking about client to therapist relationship. In this talk, I want to apply exactly the same principles to working together as a team. That the kind of idea here is that we need to promote within a team, one of the first kind of principles we would want to do is promote the capacity for help seeking within a team. Now, this may vary a lot in teams currently as to how they might function. Our experience is that help seeking and help receiving in teams is not always a natural, obvious part of a culture within a team. And I suppose why do we particularly want to put this as a key element to working in an AMBIT team? And the reasoning here is just that as Dickon has explained, mentalizing is not a capacity that one holds on to individually. That the whole kind of culture of a team working to AMBIT is that to support mentalizing in a worker requires somebody else. It requires, there's a kind of mutual interdependency of staff in order to support each other's mentalizing. So it's not about that one is messing up with a case or no good at one's job or other kinds of ideas that one might easily have in these kind of situations. It's more, this is just how it works. So that the asking for help becomes, can I just have a few minutes of your time? Because I just need to think this out more clearly about what the particular situation or a particular case. This becomes just part of the method, because mentalizing requires the capacity to be able to see one's own thinking from the outside. Now, curiously, there's a little story about Google about this, which is kind of slightly flippant, but I'll just throw it in. When Google has this within their own company, they had for a time this method by if a programmer had a problem they didn't know how to solve, they had to go and tell the big teddy bear. Now, the big teddy bear was just sat in this room. It wasn't real, obviously, just a teddy bear. And the programmer had to explain the problem to the teddy bear. What they found was a large number of problems were solved by this. Now, this isn't a complete mystery. By getting the person to actually verbalize, express, and convey the nature of how they were thinking, they found they could think about the problem differently. Now, that's kind of, now, I don't think the teddy bears would quite do. It doesn't quite work enough for us. But it gets close to the problem that in this kind of collaboration, I need a bit of help here. It's not literally in the sense that one is needing necessarily somebody else to do a great deal, other than provide a context in which one can think about one's situation as if from the outside. So you create a culture of help seeking, which is not shameful. And this is really because, I don't know about you guys, but we're a bit prone to being a bit nervous in some of the teams that I've been working with about, is it okay to say, I don't quite know what to do about this? Or is it okay to say I'm a bit lost with this case? For us in AMBIT, this is an essence of effective team functioning, the recognition that we require others in order for us to be able to do our job, not just because we're messing up in some kind of way. So help seeking is one of the first characteristics of what we'd be looking for in a team that's been influenced by AMBIT. Okay, now when we come to the idea of epistemic trust. Now, epistemic trust, I'm just going to run through briefly a study of 18-month-old children. Some of you may be familiar with this, which was one of the kind of influential studies that was done by George Gageli and his team in Budapest in Hungary. And the point about this is that, firstly, it's a bit of a kind of axiom of AMBIT that we like the kind of theories that influence to be grounded in developmental theory. This is why mentalizing is so, I think, such a useful kind of model, because it's not a therapeutic theory. It's a developmental theory. It's how we all are. We don't have problems with mentalizing as a disorder. We just have problems with mentalizing because we're human beings, and that puts it into a completely different frame. Now here, just the thing here is about how does one create trust between a client and a young person, and I'm going to focus on for this talk, we've got trust between colleagues within a team. So the story here is about, there's 3 conditions in this study in which an adult, through use of ostensive cues in the first condition, this adult is going to show a child, 18-month-old infant, 2 toys. The turquoise toy is the adult likes and smiles at, and the orange one, there's an expression of disgust towards that toy. The point here is that in the first condition, there is the use of ostensive cues. This just means eye contact, smiling, attunement, a sense of flow and connection between the adult prior to communicating their preferences about the toys that they like. The point of the first condition is that when a second adult asks the child to give them one of the toys, they tend to give, about 70% of the time, they tend to give the toy that they've been previously taught the other adult likes. So that what's here is there's been a sort of generalization that sort of adults in the world generally like turquoise toys, or whatever that is. There's the generalization occurs because the child has been shown through a process of ostensive cueing. The thing is that the value of this experiment is that if you do it without ostensive cueing, what gets passed to the second adult and the second condition is just a random. It's just chance. The child just picks either of them randomly. There's been no particular communication as to the nature of the world, but interestingly, on the third condition, without any ostensive cueing, without any attunement, without any of that, what the child learns is that particular adult prefers the turquoise cue. So there is a specific attribution. The child can learn that this particular adult is a bit fond of turquoise toys for reasons that won't necessarily be clear, but there's no generalization which in the first condition, the child learns something about the world that the world likes for reasons that, again, no particular reason. They seem to like turquoise toys a bit better, or they like that one. So that it's the generalization, the capacity that through ostensive cueing, through attunement, the child has an idea that this adult knows something, has taught me something about the world in general, not just about her. That's what we mean by epistemic trust. That's why it's not just trust, it's trust. You're trying to develop the idea that the child, the client, has some idea that you have something to offer about the world, not just whether you're a nice person or not, or they discover you're a nice person, but that you or whatever that might look like, but that you have this additional quality of what we call epistemic trust. Because if you like, what we would say is the road to recovery, or for the particular difficulties that a young person has, is can they regain their capacity to be able to accept help in all its different forms, i.e. can they regain the capacity to learn? Because what may well have happened for many young people with the kind of difficulties that you know only too well, and the whole AMBIT has been built on, is that there are young people who have lost any capacity to really be able to trust any adults in the world at all, or that there are people out there who can actually help them. Well, maybe some members of gangs and stuff may feel that other members of the gang can help them, but probably in a destructive way. So the idea here is, how do we enable people to move from really powerful positions of distrust to positions of being able to trust? So how do we do that? How does that happen? Well, like many, I spent many rather unproductive hours in my early professional life trying to encourage young people to engage in some sort of therapeutic work as me, without really having when I was faced with was really a situation I kind of experienced it, but I didn't have much of a framework for it, which is, I think, was epistemic distrust. They just couldn't see how I could be in any way helpful to them at all. So here, this is in a sense, this is the door. This is the door. This is the tell me how on earth anything you've got to offer is going to be of any use to me. So here's the adult who's thinking, how can I be helpful here? But the task is that can they get a sense of what it's like to be the other person? What's it like to be you? And can they convey something of what they imagine it might be like to be them, so that the child, young person, parent, whoever it is, can see that they are to some degree recognized as in aspects of themselves. Even, I suspect at times, it is the effort, the explicit effort, the humility that may be needed in order to enter into a process of which one is trying to see things as best one can from the other person's point of view. It's a bit more than just point of view. I think the feeling is can you see what's it like to be me, and to be able to convey something of that. And it's that fundamental process that if they can sense a sense of that you can understand what it's like to be them, that they may then have the possibility of thinking, you may know something about that may be useful for other things in my life as well. Now, this is what we, in more simple language, this is the critical kind of thing that for the clinician is, what's the mechanism? Is do you really get what it's like to be me? And that's what we call sort of opening up the epistemic trust and superhighway. Now we tell this story often, but we don't always tell our story just focusing on, okay, so how does that work in a team? Because maybe we picture that it's a traditional therapist kind of problem, how to establish engagement, rapport, trust, those kind of things are very familiar. But we would like to apply exactly the same principles in how we work within a team. So if I can say, one of the things that would facilitate creating a sense of epistemic trust is kind of showing sensitivity and attunement to context, both your context and my context. And I suppose here, teams who can be curious about aspects of difference, aspects of power, diversity, gender, sexuality, as part of creating contexts of which that is likely to create aspects of a culture that is more trusting. It is not, you can't put trust into a job description. You can't say part of the job is you've got to trust your colleagues. It doesn't, it's clearly absurd. What we're trying to do is to create conditions of which are going to facilitate more capacity for trust within a team. And I would like to reflect, for example, that at the Anna Freud Center, we recently, like many, involved in a lot of soul searching around aspects to do with racism and the Black Lives Matters movement, which I think caused a great deal of thought actually at the Anna Freud Center and within the AMBIT team. And I remember an important meeting that we had where we sat down and started to talk about aspects of diversity and difference within the team in ways that we had not done previously. And I think it was part of a process that, again, I think supported aspects of strengthening trust within the team in a general way. So here we've covered help seeking and epistemic trust. Just coming back to help seeking, I suppose there are again other kind of features that we would see as being a characteristic of teams that have adopted aspects of the AMBIT approach. I think crucially, and that has been a big surprise to us, we go around as part of the training saying, you know, sort of anxiety is good for you, or that, you know, you don't seem to be anxious enough, or, you know, I mean, there's a lot of, I'm being flippant a little, but what we really actively and very explicitly promote is the idea that anxiety is an adaptive response to the type of work that we're doing. Rather than positioning anxiety as if it's some sort of professional mess up, some kind of indication of incompetence, or that you don't know what you're doing, we really want to create a culture in which anxiety, not desirable, not excessive, we're not glorifying it, but it makes perfect sense that if a worker is dealing with someone who's self-harming or suicidal or just very unhappy or very withdrawn or experiencing symptoms of trauma or can't sleep, or all the kind of human things that we deal with, it's not surprising at times they may feel anxious about that piece of work. That to us is a completely adaptive. And teams that I think were somewhat, I don't know, I'd use the word denying, but haven't developed a kind of culture around this, I think, but get into some difficulties. Now, the point here, there's a problem with anxiety, because anxiety and mentalizing don't mix. That's one of the things that's really kind of, again, wonderfully clear about the, if I can call it the music of mentalizing, is that the clarity of that. One of the difficulties is that if somebody becomes anxious in a particular situation, then inevitably their capacity to think, like think sounds a bit cognitive, but just to make sense of things about how they're feeling or what might be going on with their colleagues or with their clients becomes compromised. This is why one relies on others. When one gets into an anxious state, then it's part of the way out of this is to be able to think, connect, mentalize with somebody else about what it is, the nature of that anxiety. I'm not in any way kind of advocating the need for chronic anxiety. I just think that it's an appropriate adaptive response which teams need to kind of support each other through. So a particular attitude towards anxiety. The second is the incredible importance of leadership modeling in help seeking. What makes a difference? It's a completely different thing for a new trainee to turn up in a team and start and be invited to engage in help seeking. They feel vulnerable, unsure, they lack confidence, understandably. What they need is to see that help seeking is something that is carried out by those who carry authority or seniority within a team. That the loss of the capacity to mentalize isn't about some professional incompetence. It's about being a human being. And that doesn't matter if you're the consultant psychiatrist, the consultant psychologist, or the assistant psychologist. We're all prone to this. We all get drawn into things that get us steamed up and get us anxious, get us angry, get us frustrated, all sorts of things. That's the nature of the work. But it's because we're human beings, not because of anything else. And it's the loss of that mentalizing capacity is not necessarily massively reduced. I don't know. I'm going to say something a little controversial. I don't know if training changes our capacity to hold a mentalizing stance. I don't know. Maybe it does. Maybe it does a bit. But I think what it really does is it really enables people to notice when we're not mentalizing. That, I think, is very, very, very influenced by training and by a team that is uncritical about that possibility. And that's a really powerful change in how a team functions. So I would say the collective expertise, or the expertise, what I've written here is the collective recognition of the loss of mentalizing is not a personal competency. You know what, we don't have to become, as Dickens uses the phrase, mentalizing ninjas. You know, you don't want somebody who just like it becomes an aspect of mastery. The team collectively can develop a confidence about how to manage this. That's what I think one is after. And clearly one element of that, I've mentioned this about the role of leadership modeling for people in senior positions to be able to be comfortable in sharing their need for help about certain aspects of their work with other members of the team is a very, very important component of how teams function. And if I can just commend my dear friend Dickon about this, who is a complete master at this, in being able to kind of, without losing authority in the sense of, no, we've still got to deal with these things and everyone can hold their roles and responsibilities, but being able to share a vulnerability as a human being while retaining a kind of professional position of responsibility. I'm not advocating panic or just loss of role, but just the capacity for that to be modeled by senior people in the team is, I think, one of the things that often leads to why AMBIT becomes embedded in some teams rather than others. So to summarize, in a team, for this, where we got to so far, we're validating what we call worker worry, reducing professional shame, valuing mentalizing in our work, recognizing and taking seriously its fragility, recognizing that the recovery of mentalizing requires the involvement of others, so that we need to take each other seriously. That's the theme we're onto. Okay, that's okay. Now we come to another aspect of working as a team. Again, some of you will be familiar with this, who know have come in contact with AMBIT, because this is one of the things that's highlighted quite a lot. So this is Dickon going up a mountain. As he commented on, you get a lot of mountaineering metaphors in AMBIT. I can only apologize about this, but anyway, here we go. So the idea of this is to on the left-hand side, or what's just come on the screen, is the common kind of traditional practice. For children, young people, and families with complex problems, you have a team around the client, a team around, and you assemble all the different parts of the expertise around the child, and where that works, just keep doing it. Not a problem. If you have children and young people and families who have the capacity to engage in multiple helping relationships at the same time, and many do, then this is fine. This doesn't need to, we don't need to complicate something which may be seen as a routine aspect of practice. However, AMBIT arose because for many of the families and young people we work with, this did not work well at all. So we came up with, rather than focusing on particular roles and responsibilities, we came up with the model of which privileged, the fundamental thing, was the critical relationship between the young person and family, and one key, what could be called key worker, case worker, it doesn't matter what the title is. The critical thing was to not overwhelm the family with multiple helping relationships, but to support a key worker in having perhaps unfamiliar roles in relation to the needs of the child or young person. This critical change, honestly, it's so easy to describe in about 10 minutes in a talk like this. It's the potential kind of implications of this are absolutely enormous. If one moves away from thinking about the critical organizing principle of who should work with a young person is not necessarily the person with the expertise about their problem, but the person who they trust. Now, again, I don't want to be flippant about here, but I have the kind of potential disruption of moving to a relational model rather than an expertise model is enormous, and not for the faint-hearted. It really opens up all sorts of major difficulties. But okay, that's a slight sort of caution. But we have multiple examples of how this has proved very effective in moving families or children, young people, into helping relationships where previously they were not in any way in a useful relationship with helping agencies. The critical bit here is the rope. How do we ensure that the person who has the relationship with a particular client is properly supported by other members of the team and doesn't feel dumped, abandoned, or just simply kind of in a point of discomfort where they might be being asked to do things that are completely different from what they used to do. I'm going to tell what this is so key. I'm going to just tell one or two stories about this. I mean, going right back 15 years ago or so ago, we set up a team in Islington where I worked to try and work with some of these most difficult families who didn't see us as particularly helpful to them. One of the very first young people we worked with was gained a relationship with a very experienced and very kind, very caring social worker. And after a while, the social worker who was visiting this young person at home, this young person didn't go to school at all, it was about a 12-year-old boy, didn't go to school. We asked, we had a conversation about what did the young person really want help with? Well, it sounds a pretty obvious kind of question, but it's surprising how rarely that gets asked. And he said he wanted help with reading because when he goes to school, he feels humiliated by the prospect of having to read in front of other people. He had multiple other problems. He was involved in all kinds of, but he said he wanted help with reading. So David, the social worker, said, well, I don't know anything about reading. I'm a social worker. I don't do reading. So he said, no, that's not how this works. So we got somebody to help David work out how he could do reading activity with this young person as part of his social work visits. What we've discovered was something that, looking back, was so obvious, but to us was not obvious at the time. Was that what was astonishing for this boy was that his request was met. This was, I remember the discussion we had in the team was that he was astonished that David changed his behavior in response to the child's request as to what he wanted help with. David never pretended to be a great teacher of reading. It really wasn't the point. The point was he was prepared to sit down and they sort of read something together and they practiced and they talked about what it was like. It was very kind of common sense in some ways, nothing too technical. But what was significant for the child was that we changed our behavior in relation to what he wanted and said. After a bit, he lost interest in the reading. In some ways, it didn't matter in the long run. It wasn't that we had to get to the, you know, if there had been a really sort of more technical problem of our reading that needed specialist help, then maybe over time, and this has been another kind of pattern, David might have been gone along with the young person to some specialist help. And that's what I want to come to now, is the sort of second example of just this. What we're trying to reconcile, I say, is expertise and relational help. Here's an example, again, of another kind of project that we're involved in. This is a young person. It's a slightly made up example, but based on, this is a young person. Yeah, she's about 9 in this story, and she's got very, very severe anxiety, barely going out of the house, and absolutely refusing to go near any kind of therapy or CAM service. That absolutely terrified her. Anxiety about social arrangements were very, very severe. And I've just put round her on this, you know, that she would have sort of fears and anxieties for many children about help seeking. She feels shame, didn't know what to say, didn't know what help is, all sorts of common worries for children. One thing she did is she went to a dance class. She felt comfortable in a dance class for ways that weren't entirely clear, but she's had a relationship with a dance teacher for about 2 years, and this has been the one thing that she found pleasure in. Partly, it seemed to us, because nobody asked her stuff, that if she could just do the dancing. Oh, anyway, we had all sorts of speculations. But when we were able to have any kind of conversation with her as to who she would like to, who she felt comfortable to talk to, she said, the dance teacher. Okay, so here with the dance teacher. So we go and talk to the dance teacher. The dance teacher is deeply nervous about this. I'm a dance teacher. I don't know anything about this. I don't know about anxiety. I don't know what to say. I'm not a doctor. I've got all kinds of problems with this. You know, I'm not quite sure about it. So we have to, in the same way as the other example, we have to ensure that we work very closely with dance teacher. If dance teacher is going to take on a little bit of a kind of initially, a kind of how are you kind of role of offering her, you know, 10 minutes after the dance class just to see how she is, building up a bit of an interest in and how she is. And this is what the young person herself requested. The point here is this exactly mirrors the experiment with the 18-month-old child. Where we're really going with this is that after a bit, what happens sorry, I left a little piece of the jigsaw out. The important thing in the help that the dance teacher is getting, the dance teacher mentions the help that he is getting from a therapist or whoever it is in the team to the child, that his relationship to help is explicit. He shares that he finds it helpful to talk to the therapist so that he can ask the right sort of questions to the child. He starts to convey a confidence in somebody else to the child. He models his own necessity of seeking help, and he shares that with the child. So at some point further down the track, and we've had quite a few examples of this, what may well be the case, and what we would encourage, is that dance teacher and child go to see therapists together. That the child has some confidence that if this person is helpful to the dance teacher, they might be helpful to her. So that she's learning something about the world through the cues, the ostensive cues, and the knowledge she's gaining from the dance teacher. It's an exact parallel of the study of the 18-month-old child. And this is the process by which there is the capacity to develop trust. May not be that we have to develop, the child or the client has to develop trust in us. We have to turn the question around for a team. Exactly the same is how do we support lost my thought. I'm going to move on. Okay. Now, give me a... Okay, I'll keep going. Right. Another aspect of working as a team. We were very interested. Okay, now what the story here is about our responsibility to colleagues. In the previous example, we've been saying one of the things is that you've got to create support which is real, active, explicit, and shared with your client to a worker who may be outside their comfort zone. If you've got, I don't know, I'm just guessing a little bit, if you've got a speech therapist who has a great relationship with a child, but the child also needs some physiotherapy, I don't know exactly how it might work. But are there ways that the speech therapist can promote the physio work that's needed in a way? Can they move a little bit outside of their comfort zone in order to manage the relational help in such a way? How do we support people to move slightly outside their comfort zones? That's what I suppose in the shorthand, that's what I was trying to get at. Here, this is a slightly different theme. The theme here is that sometimes we may have to take an active position in trying to support the mentalizing of some of the members of the team. It's not just about, can I be helpful? Sometimes we might have to be slightly more assertively helpful. And this thinking came from this particular instance, which was a rather tragic incident of an airline crash that was written about a lot, where the pilot lost really, there was a crash because the undercarriage wheels wouldn't go down. And the pilot got so concerned with trying to find ways to get the landing gear to go down, they lost sight of the fact they ran out of fuel. And the particular story about this and the learning that came out of it was that the rest of the crew were unable to challenge the pilot about in this situation. I mean, really tragic, really. But we think there's much to be learned from the airline industry, because they talked about this as, the loss of situational awareness. The kind of what was lost was the overall situation was lost because they got preoccupied with a particular kind of issue. And so they worked out some training for staff around trying to find ways that they could, where it was needed, to challenge aspects of hierarchy and power. And we've really adapted it. I don't want to go into too much of the detail of this, but really what we're trying to emphasize is that colleagues have some responsibility to try to recognize when members of the team may be getting stuck, caught up in repetitive patterns with clients, where where the only solution is to carry on doing what you've been doing, just do more, just do it again, just do another 6 months or whatever it is. Or there might be all sorts of ways of which people get caught in their commitment to the client, which is no longer proving particularly productive. An example, I was working with a team in Sweden, and there was a very powerful example the team got caught up in, where they had developed an excellent relationship with a young person. I think she was about 15, but the young person was subject to really very severe emotional abuse from one of the parents, where she was just basically denigrated and criticized in a way that was excessive and abusive. The whole team, we had formed and made agreements with the families, for the parents, that this behaviour should stop, that it was just simply not okay, from a safeguarding point of view. It's not okay. It's not okay. And reassurances were given repeatedly by one of the parents, only one of the parents, that it would stop, but it didn't. And this had gone on for too long. And it was necessary, really, there was a tremendous kind of conflict within the team about protecting the relationship with the child or making a referral to the safeguarding agency. And it was just, this was an example where, from my perspective, there was a loss of situational awareness. There was a loss of recognizing the risk to the child about the toxic situation they were in. As it turned out, the involvement of safeguarding agencies did not result in the loss of the relationship with the young person, which is not an unusual. Well, it varies what the consequences may be in that sort of situation. But here, I suppose the emphasis is in thinking. You're inviting me to talk about what would be some of the characteristics of an AMBIT team. One of them would be an active sense of responsibility towards where in cases where teams get very conflicted about their commitment to the client and particular benefits. Now, I suspect I'm going over time, so I've got to be a little careful now. I wanted just in the last bits, I want to talk a bit about the AMBIT approach to networks from a team perspective. We've got rather too much to say about working with networks in some way. I suppose the critical thing, some of them will be not surprising on the basis of Dickens' comments at the beginning about the nature of disintegration being a natural resting place. So I want to go, really I'm just repeating some of that, and again, wanting to emphasize that we, I suppose, try to create an attitude of, I don't know what the best words are, an attitude of generosity towards relationships of across agencies as part of the culture of AMBIT. That doesn't quite cut the strength of feeling that network relationships can create, which are one of the kind of interesting observations for us is that in some of the basic AMBIT training, the session that around networks where we start to explore relationships between teams within the network of where a particular team works can produce some of the most strong expressed emotion of the whole training. More emotion than in relation to the sessions on working with clients. The strength of feeling that can exist about who's good and who's not good and who's helpful and who's not helpful in a network of teams is, well, I'm not going to say it's astonishing, but it's some of it is extremely powerful. And it's not at all a surprise that, that this then impacts on clients who are working with these different agencies when there can be such strong levels of, whether it's distrust or lack of respect or a sense that we're trying to do different things or whatever it is. But the emotional stuff is high. And I suppose for us in AMBIT, we first of all, in the usual sort of style, wanted to recognize it, be curious about it. But I suppose increasingly wanted to take a position of generosity, i.e. that we need to be thoughtful about this, this level of feeling. In a way, it seems to me that in networks, it's a very understandable metaphor. You're trying to get a situation that will be similar to maybe the way two parents might function. They don't necessarily have to think the same. They may have all sorts of different ideas about a particular problem, but they have to have some capacity to work together with some aspects of shared ideas and shared respect, even though for much of the time, quite understandably, and actually to much to the child's benefit, that parents don't always in any way think the same. That's not how a good jazz band works. They don't all play the same instrument. They've got to do things that show difference. I'm going to just emphasize a couple of things that I suppose we would, I suppose they're tricks, I suppose. It's a couple of things that for teams and working with networks is that clearly how we speak about other teams to clients matters. in the same way that young people learn about, just the same as that the developmental study arrangements, how we speak about the world matters. There was a terrible moment in my career when I was with a family, and they said, we've just been allocated this social worker, and this social worker is called da 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 da. And I said completely spontaneously, oh, that's marvelous, she's great. And I mean, that wasn't, I didn't mind that. I mean, I didn't do anything wrong at that moment. What struck me at that moment was I rarely had said that before in my career. What struck me was how rarely did I positively connote the contribution of other professionals in the work of the clients I work with. It just so happened that I happened to know this social worker really well, and she'd been fantastically helpful in some recent case. And it resulted in this spontaneous expression of confidence in how much she would also be helpful to the family. But I noticed that it was just laughed at, that was not generally how I behaved. And it made me think a lot, because it made quite an impression on them. That they thought, oh, okay, because they were kind of going, oh God, got a social worker, ghastly, and all that sort of thing. And I thought, it's interesting. I'm not suggesting it's as simple as that, just simple story, but a general stance of conveying confidence. I know sometimes it's hard because you may not feel it, but I think a stance of that is because to recognize that we have impact on how families may see other professionals in the system. This matters. The two other things I think are really important is just attachment principles. Increasing predictability. Most cross-agency arrangements are a bit chaotic. They're very unpredictable. They don't work. They're not necessarily that systematic. So how do you create predictability? And that, I think, results in trust and confidence. Hey, if you're going to ring somebody at 3 o'clock, ring them at 3 o'clock. A very kind of behavioral in this, just try, if you say you're going to offer some support about a case, then do it. Keep your promises. I mean, that's this kind of a simple kind of child version of it. Because if you create predictability, well, that is likely to have an impact in just the same way as it does in terms of attachment behavior. And the third one is about increasing connectedness. Inviting others to come and join and meet in team meetings, having a visitor slots, or sort of just being open to helping other people to know what on earth you do. We model it by opening ourselves to these opportunities. There was a great story from a team in Spain who had a bit of an open event. I invited some local, I think it was adult psychiatrists, to come and others and just sort of see what they were doing, what they were working with these very, very violent, difficult street kids. And what was astonishing was that only it wasn't that long afterwards that they had a particular case where they wanted some advice about aspects of drug use and medication, and they were able to, I don't mean to say this make use of, but they then had a relationship that they could then get some advice about a particular case in a much more efficient way than had been the case if they've been doing this as a bit of a like cold calling. So increasing connectedness in the same way that one would in an attachment kind of model will be an aspect of how a team functions in the network. Okay. You can't tell who I'm looking at, but Namar, can you give me? I've lost track of time. How much more time have I got?
We actually have to finish soon so that we can get a few more minutes for questions from the audience.
So let me. Okay. So let me just now quickly. The last thing is just to emphasize that I suppose behind all of this, in terms of what we're thinking about for a team, is thinking about a team as a learning organization. Now, some of you will know this literature better than we do, but I suppose we were influenced by the idea of learning organizations, particularly by the work of Peter Senge. So essentially this is really trying to frame is to avoid fixed positions about the nature of the help that we offer, and to create conditions which enable exploration and learning. Now, just to kind of, okay, that's in a way, as a principal position, not many people are going to be against that. I suppose what we're trying to do is create methods to do that. And what Dickon has already mentioned is that one, it's not that you can simply sort of, not anything goes. I suppose that's what I wanted to just quickly say. Not anything goes. You can't just say, well, why don't we just do it like this? There has to be some checks and balances. So you have a basic model, which is informed by evidence and so thought, so AMBIT will be influenced by a whole bunch of research and activity. Then there might be local adaptations, but those local adaptations have to be held in a certain disciplined way. So we would absolutely welcome, and the whole of this meeting is a kind of wonderful example of how there could be local adaptations, but they need to be held in a discipline. The discipline would be whatever those adaptations are, write them down. We call that manualizing. And the whole intention is that if you want to do something a bit different, or they want to adapt it to your local purpose, it needs to be done in a systematic way. So manualizing, not an easy kind of activity actually, but the one that we would absolutely see as crucial, and it helps people to make sense of their own behavior within a team. And the second critical bit of the checks and balances is that you can't just do what you like. You can't just say, well, we fancy doing it this way, unless it's kind of linked to some kind of way of recognizing that the nature of the help that teams offer is going to be variable for their clients. There is no intervention in the world, I'm going to be absolutely certain, categorical and non-mentalizing, that works for everyone. There just isn't any data. There's just no data. Now for teams, many teams actually struggle with that. They want to help everybody. But the critical thing of why a kind of outcomes framework is essential is because a point of curiosity for teams needs to be, what we help some, we don't help all. Who are the ones we help? Who are the ones we don't help? And why? Not because you're going to be able to help everybody, but I think, you know, we're looking roughly in terms of the sort of data we have in the UK for mental health teams. If you're showing improvement in 50 or 60% of cases that come through your team, you're doing pretty well. They're pretty consistent with data. And the interesting question might be, which somebody once asked me, I'm a commissioner, person who purchases our service, once said, how could you get 60? How could you get from 60 to 65? How could you just try and improve your outcomes a little? That's a really good question. Not how do you get from 60 to 90? That's a daft question because nobody knows how to do that. But how could you go from 60 to 65 is a really good question. And actually, I'm quite proud to say we did. Because there were things that we could do, but it had to be, I suppose, the critical bit was that if you're going to have a kind of open system, as Dickon has advocated, if you're going to have a kind of capacity to learn and think, you have to have some checks and balances to that, which I would say is being able to be explicit what your practices are and being able to check what the benefits are to the clients who come through. The last bit is today, which is communities of practice. So we're very fond of. I'm not going to go through the slides, but I suppose for us, what another aspect of an AMBIT team or a team that's been influenced by AMBIT ideas and how do we help a team to function as well, would be what's the relationship of the team to other teams that do similar stuff, and this is why. Dickon and I are genuinely, it's not just courtesy. Coming to this meeting today is for us a kind of extension of the community of practice. That you guys, you've taken some ideas and you say, well, they look quite interesting, but we could do it like this and do it like that. And that's marvelous. And to us, it's part of the kind of health of the system is can we share, can teams share what they do with other teams who are doing similar kind of areas of work. So I suppose just to finish today's talk, I suppose we are thrilled and interested in your curiosity about the AMBIT model, but we see a bit today as a bit of a kind of mission and an opportunity based on, Namar, your first kind of inquiry to us, which is just can this be the beginnings of a kind of extension of the community of practice of teams that are interested in this approach. Thank you. I'm sorry if I've gone over time. My apologies for that.